Good evening and welcome to this International School Leadership ISL webinar. My name is Cam Fraser and I'm the Principal Qualification Program Lead for the Ontario Principals Council. As you may know, ISL is a subsidiary of the OPC. ISL offers training and certification programs, consulting and study tours focusing on driving the highest levels of achievement for school leaders around the globe. We'd like to welcome 140 participants tonight from 11 countries. This is the fourth free online presentations. Previous interviews featuring Michael Fullen, Andy Hargraves, and Ken Leithwood can be found archived on the ISL website. This live web-based interview features our advisory panel member, Dr. Lyn Sharratt, author of Good to Great to Innovate. She is also an internationally recognized speaker and author, and we're really pleased to have her with us tonight. So welcome, Lyn.
Thanks, Cam. Great to be here.
Well, congratulations.
I'm in good company.
Oh, yes, well, we hope.
Absolutely.
Congratulations on a very rich content book.
Thank you.
I thought we would start by looking at the structure of the book.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you can walk us through that because it's fascinating.
Sure. I have a wonderful co-author, Gail Harold, who is a colleague and a good friend, and I feel that we write really well together, and it took us a while to put this book together in terms of thinking about what readers need and what kind of structures in a book they need to help them through this rich content. So if we look at the book, it starts with questions that matter, things that we thought system leaders and school leaders would be thinking about as they perhaps led book studies or just had their own self-reflections. At the end of the chapter then, we have steps that we've taken throughout the chapter, so we delineate what they are. And in the chapter, we've tried to capture vignettes and system stories and personal stories, photographs and also quotes that help the reader through the content. Then at the end of each chapter, we've asked our colleagues and certainly thought leaders across the globe to comment on each chapter. And we didn't tell them what to say. We asked them to be provocative and think about the chapter and then add their own lens. So in chapter 1, we have Dr. Avis Glaze. In chapter 2, Dr. Ken Leithwood. In chapter 3, Dr. Elma Harris. In chapter 4, Dr. Louise Stoll. In chapter 5, Dr. Yong Zhou. And in chapter 6, Susie Boss. So they add reflections from their own perspective that really helped guide our thinking as well. At the end of the book, we have Andy Hargraves offering an epilogue, and at the beginning of the book, Dr. Michael Fullen offering his foreword. And I must tell you that when I got the piece from Andy, Gail and I said, "Oh, it's just a fabulous epilogue, Andy." And he said, "You know, no one reads the epilogue." So if our listeners don't do anything else, perhaps they could enjoy that epilogue because it is really thought-provoking. And then at the very end of the book, we've put in appendices that we thought would be those templates that really offer how we go about this. So throughout the book, it's about what could be in place, but it's also about how you do it. So it is content rich, and hopefully the questions provide a framework for folks thinking through the chapters.
And I think, as you said, the examples make it authentic.
Yes.
And the experts at the end of each chapter make it rich and extend our thinking when we're going through it.
Exactly.
So, the next question, we know that it's vital to understand what matters most in providing leadership within a good to great system. What does it take for a principal or a teacher in a school system to become good to great, to ensure students have optimum learning opportunities?
When I think about system leaders and school leaders, I think of the importance of number one, being a knowledgeable other, teachers look to our leaders to be knowledgeable, to understand what it looks like when we believe that all students can learn given the right time and support. All teachers can teach with the right assistance. Leaders who have high expectations and consider early and ongoing interventions. And knowledgeable leaders who can clearly articulate why they do what they do. So we need leaders who are knowledgeable in schools and systems. We need leaders who can mobilize staffs and whole systems towards improvement, who can create those we environments. That's what we say. Michael and I said in putting faces on the data. So it's not about my school and my students. It's about our schools. And it's really about our schools across the system and across systems, plural, so that we really own all the students and care in responsible ways for ensuring that all their learning is extended. And then finally, we need to think about sustainability and moving from good to great. System leaders and school leaders need to think about how to sustain their improvement work long after they're gone. And that involves thinking about the leaders we're leaving behind. So kind of those three things stand out for me in the work that I've done across the globe. It also, I guess, in moving from good to great, you need high energy. You need that high energy and motivation and imaginability to really grasp what's possible.
I love your use of ability in the book. No ability, mobilizability,
Yeah, mobilizability.
And sustainability
Yes.
is powerful. And I liked when you speak to that sustainability, because you're talking about getting away from every time a principal goes into a new school, they change the culture.
Exactly.
And if we own the culture across the system, we continue what's going on.
There shouldn't be any changes, but always moving forward. And sustainability, I think, is the hardest one to think about. We're usually always in the present, trying to be knowledgeable others, velcroing ourselves beside those who are knowledgeable so we can learn as well, trying to mobilize everyone to move forward in the same direction. Sustainability is more difficult. We need to think about that.
And as system leaders and leaders, how do we do that? I love it when you say Velcro yourself to someone who knows how to do it.
Exactly.
Thank you. How can community partners add to innovation, leadership, and education? I know this is a huge part of your book, and so powerful.
Yes. And you know, we need to clarify who are the community partners first. And of course, parents are community partners that we've known and drawn into our work for a very long time. I think we also need to think about reaching out to parents, not always expecting them to come in. That's a little bit more challenging, to go to places where parents are, and it is certainly challenging in this day. Community partners as well can be our public sector partners, can be our post-secondary destination partners, can be our business community partners and our industry partners. Those sectors we don't think as much about, but certainly in the book that's a huge focus for us, that if we want students who are well prepared to go to many varied destinations, we need to think early and often about those community partners that we can build strong alliances with.
It's part of that career readiness you talk about.
Exactly. Yeah, that starts in kindergarten. And also, Cam, you'll notice in the book that the title is interesting. It's Good to Great to Innovate, Recalculating the Route to Career Readiness, K to 12 plus. And the plus sign means that we don't stop thinking about our recalculated route to innovation at secondary school, but that we continue those investigations of destinations beyond 12. So we've got that little plus sign.
And it's purposeful. It makes so much sense. It makes so much sense to add that to our primary grades, that plus.
Absolutely.
Think about it down there. So we're getting them ready all the way through their education.
Yes, absolutely. You know, it's too late in grade 11 to think about providing opportunities for students in multiple pathways. We need to start in kindergarten.
I agree. We're going to now move to a clip from one of our participants. This is Malcolm Elliott from the Tasmanian Principals Association. He has a question for you, Lyn.
Okay.
Hello everybody, my name's Malcolm Elliott. I'm the President of the Tasmanian Principals Association in Australia. My question is, what are the features of schools and systems that sustain innovative thinking and educational practice?
Cam, I think that question really points to our 5 guiding principles. We've thought carefully about these principles to kind of focus and align our work and our thinking. So the first guiding principle is an inclusive, equitable environment. And for me, schooling is about equity and excellence. So we want that to be an inclusive environment. That means, to me, all students have multiple opportunities to success. That's number 1. And number 2 is a relevant, robust curriculum. When I think of relevant and robust, I think of a curriculum that is focused around critical thinking expectations. So expectations as well that lead students to wonder, be curious. Opportunities open up through the curriculum expectations for students to research and have choice and voice in what they want to know more about. The third guiding principle we've talked a little bit about, and that's embracing community partners. Well beyond, inclusive of our parents, but well beyond reaching out. The fourth guiding principle is skilled teachers. And a system, I believe, is only as strong as its teachers are. And our teachers need to be very, very skilled in beginning in kindergarten with inquiry, collaborative inquiry that progresses into experiential learning opportunities for students and is structured, collaboratively planned approach to teaching and learning. And
sorry, I was thinking when you were talking about that one of the partners is the students. So
Exactly.
The students are part of that planning, part of planning of that curriculum.
Yes, and that teachers are inclusive of students in deconstructing learning goals and co-constructing success criteria. So students always know how to be successful. So it takes skilled teachers to provide that kind of learning space and learning environment for our students. And finally, our last guiding principle that speaks to what we need to do to move systems to be innovative is innovation leadership. And you've noticed we've called it innovation leadership as opposed to innovative leadership. So it's not grabbing hold of the latest, greatest new idea that's out there, but actually thinking about innovation leadership in terms of moving from a traditional approach to an open-minded approach where failure can happen and we learn from our failures and we build on our successes. And that equitable learning environment involves being an innovation leader as well.
I think powerful in your book is that notion around voice and choice, but not just for students, but for the adults in the building, for the teachers. It leads to engagement with all the stakeholders.
Yeah. And when we talk about a structured, collaboratively planned approach, that certainly is at every level of the system as well. And why we use the word structured, we struggled with that, but we wanted collaboration to be in the system, time for collaboration and within a structure, not a barrier to dialogue and discussion, but a structured approach. So it's the antithesis of chaos, I guess. Yes. We didn't want to say that anything goes in inquiry and collaboration, but actually it's thoughtful, respectful.
And we know the best innovations are the well-planned innovations.
Exactly.
Right.
And you take informed risks, not risks that are frivolous, but actually, you know, you've done the research.
Done the research. Collected the data.
Exactly.
Yeah. Great. Then before I ask you a question about leadership skills, can you share what you mean by putting faces on the data? It was first mentioned in your co-authored publication with Michael Fullen, putting faces on the data.
Michael and I wrote our first book, Realization. He's a marvelous co-writer and certainly a thought leader I have great admiration of. And Michael and I wrote Realization because we wanted to tell the story of how a district moves forward, inclusive of all students. And as we were writing this book, our research led us to find the 14 areas of system and school improvement. And they came from the teachers. So I think that's very powerful, that these 14 areas we just kind of didn't dream up. They were 14 well-researched areas that teachers said, this is what makes a difference. We researched in highly challenged schools and where they were doing well overcoming obstacles, and we wanted to know what they were doing. So Realization was our first book, and I thought our only book. But then we met some students that changed our perspective. Students who, one we call Louis, who fell between the cracks, and we found him in grade 11 not being able to read. And Louis' story and the Tiger story, Tiger, a little one in grade 1 who everyone said he wouldn't get extra resources because it would be a waste. And we found through reading recovery he was able to read, and Tiger was identified as Down syndrome. So it was through the Tiger story and the Louis story that we really realized that parameter number 1, shared beliefs and understandings, had to be front and center, and we had to put the faces on the data in order to take action as teachers and leaders. So it was really our first piece of writing that led us to uncover some students that had been missed, overlooked, rejected, that caused us to think again about how important it is to not only put faces on the data, but have that cognitive insight and emotional connection to every face and take action with and on behalf of all students.
You talk in the book about data walls and the use of data, and it's just gone out of my head, the kind of meeting, what do you call it?
The case management meeting.
Case management meeting. Right. Can you talk a little bit about that and maybe how some schools, some examples of how schools are using it?
Yeah. I think that if we had data walls and case management meetings, we probably wouldn't have the Louis that we write about. So parameter number 6 is that case management approach. So one of the original 14. And we look for very pragmatic ways to know our students and personalize our connections with students. So data walls to me are those really tangible ways that we can look at data. And I think it's important here to say that data just they aren't the stats that we might think they are. They can be samples of student work. It was just recently that I went to Waterloo region in Ontario and to Park Manor Public School with James Bond, the principal. And the teachers there have a wonderful data wall that tells many things about each student, including the learning skills, academic achievement and progress and showing growth, and as well, each teacher has put a mark under each of the faces that he or she has made a personal connection to. So it's, even though it's data walls, it's really evidence-based knowing
And
the
it's
students.
really creating a whole picture of the student,
It is.
just
It
not
is.
looking at
No.
the numbers, but looking at the whole student.
Absolutely.
That's important.
And it's from the data walls then that we see students that are struggling, that might surprise us, and they might be struggling in various ways. And it's each of those students that will come to a case management meeting, one at a time, with the leader and a few of the teachers. The classroom teacher, of course, brings the student to the table in terms of a sample of the student work. And whoever else can be released to come to the table. It can be as few as 3 people, as many as 6. The focus is on the student, and collectively everyone owns the responsibility for the student progressing. So I have come to believe it's a whole system approach, a whole school approach. It's also student by student, teacher by teacher. So we need both and.
For sure. We've talked about leadership skills moving from good to great. How do we move from good to great to innovate?
And innovation to us really considered that collaborative approach and the ability to imagine. So collaborative planning, collaborative approaches, collaborative structures, plus the ability to imagine to us equals innovation. Now there are many attributes of the innovation leader. Certainly we need to see traditional leadership skills that can also move, not totally negate the traditional approaches to leadership that we need. Those transformational leadership practices, I think, hold us in good stead. Those instructional leadership practices hold us in good stead. As well, as an innovation leader, we need to have those open mindsets. We need to defer judgment. We need to encourage voice and choice in our teachers, with our students. We need to be careful about hiring skilled teachers who can speak to and give examples of how they've made a difference in students' lives. Our innovation leaders need to know how to build on others' ideas, to take those calculated risks, to encourage wild thinking. And I think that particular point we talked about in terms of skilled teachers as well. And we wondered whether we should put that in the book, encourage wild thinking, because it's a term you don't hear very often. And we took the calculated risk to put it in the book to actually promote discussion. As well, I think our innovation leaders, as we've mentioned, need to reach out, understand the big picture, see the forest and the trees, be on the balcony and on the dance floor at the same time. It's an exciting job. It needs high energy. At the same time, we need to understand the layers that start with the student, that continue with community partners, skilled teachers, and leaders who understand how to promote best practice in classrooms. And we need to think about leadership at the system level and also at the government level. We need to think about how our leaders impact policy at the system level. And certainly in Ontario, we have thought about that in terms of our courses and our innovations around specialist high skill major programs that are accessible to all of our students. That's a way to impact policy in large systems and in states.
Great. Everyone is talking about 21st century learning skills. You share that to move from good to great to innovate system leaders, principals and teachers must think, behave, and model 21st century learning skills. How do you address 21st century learning skills in your book?
Well, we start, Cam, with the literate graduate. And I think it's really important to know have the end in mind that good that solid assessment literacy of knowing what the end point is. So I encourage our readers to also define what their literate graduates look like. Taking into account that for us, literacy is beyond reading and writing, speaking and listening, and extends to problem solving, mathematical literacy. And for us, our literate graduates need to have that innovation mindset. They need to be encouraged to be curious, to be creative, to be collaborative and communicative. So all of the skills that we hear some of the writers that describe 21st century learning skills, we embrace those, but we want to be really clear that the foundational skills, the essential skills, are the literate graduate skills. So that is a theme running throughout the book.
Great. We have a question from one of our participants. This is Sonia Keller, from the Executive Director from the Tri-Association of American Schools of Central America, Colombia, Caribbean, and Mexico.
Hello, Dr. Sharratt. I'm Sonia Keller, the Executive Director for the Association of American Schools in Mexico, Central America, Colombia, and the Caribbean Islands. In your work with international schools around the world, what would you consider are the biggest challenges these schools face in providing students with the kinds of innovative pathways you mentioned in your book? And what advice would you have for our type of school in their quest to move from good to great to innovate?
Well, I think first of all we need to, as I mentioned, really define who the learners are and what they will look like as they graduate from those schools. And secondly, I think we have to develop policy, and I always recommend that policy stay in draft so that it can be an evolving policy, but some policy around what are the boundaries, the non-negotiables for teaching, quality teaching in classrooms. And then I think we need to assist in finding time to collaboratively plan, as we talk about. Every place that Michael and I go, and now Gail and I go as well, time becomes an issue. And so I think it's important that leaders at all school levels find the time and the resources. We know there's only so much time in the school day, and so we need to reconstruct the time we have so that there are times in the school day that leaders walk into classrooms, talk with students, talk with teachers after school, asking questions they authentically want to know more about. So finding those resources that support teachers and students in classrooms. And I think really for me, another thing that's very important and is a challenge is ensuring the assessment for and as learning as well as of learning in every classroom, so that we're developing students who are assessment capable, so that they're capable of discussing what they're learning, how they're doing, how they can improve, where can they go for help. So having students be really articulate about their learning, and similarly leaders and teachers as well.
And starting with that collective understanding, that collective vision of what all of that's going to look like.
Absolutely. And for us, for a very long time, that collective vision that drives the improvement must be singularly focused. Now, Michael says, well, maybe 3 stickies, but we need to be really tight and focused on what is that vision, what is our priority.
Thank you. We have another participant question. This is from Darren Bryant from the Hong Kong Institute of Education.
My name is Darren Bryant. I'm an assistant professor at the Hong Kong Institute of Education and an associate director of the Asia Pacific Center for Leadership and Change. So this is my question. all around the world, education systems seem to be under more and more pressure because of comparative performance measures such as PISA. And this seems to stimulate policymakers to look overseas and internationally for reforms to improve student learning outcomes. So what I would like to know is, what evidence do we actually have that these sorts of comparative measures are stimulating innovation and change that has impact down at the district, school, and classroom levels?
So I first want to talk a little bit about evidence, because evidence comes in many forms, and Darren has talked about PISA, and that's certainly one piece of evidence. Perception data is something that I haven't taken seriously, probably as seriously as I should have in the past, until just recently. Being at OISE and the University of Toronto, we like quantitative data, and we're always venturing into quantitative data. Perception data is kind of trailing behind in terms of priority, but I really feel that perception data measures important aspects of how we're doing in schooling. So evidence to me is multi-layered in terms of kinds of data. I want to, it's interesting that Professor Bryant talks about PISA data. I must say that the collaborative problem solving matrix that PISA is putting into place, the OECD, I think is outstanding. I think it's very difficult to frame problem solving and develop a matrix that can be measured. So I think this foray into measuring collaborative problem solving is a good model for us. Having said that, when I look across the globe, I see that the kind of data that is driving the change comes from the other sectors other than education, comes from business and industry through perception data, saying that we're not producing or graduating the kind of students that they need in business and industry. So that might be driving some of the change we see in education just as much as PISA scores. Although I do think those comparative measures certainly are considered and add to the mix of the kinds of data that we use to make a difference. But I think those economic and social drivers are data that really are helping us also make the changes that we need to in the educational system to be in line with and meet the expectations in other sectors.
And I think that leads nicely to a question I wanted to ask you about. What do you mean by the term, or maybe you can explain this recalculated route?
Right.
And how is this related to the innovation mindset?
Yeah. Well, the recalculated route is something that we've thought a lot about. We've thought a lot about a route that starts in kindergarten, understanding and really articulating for our students that there are multiple ways to opportunity and successful career paths. So we don't, I think we have always made the assumption as parents and certainly as teachers and leaders that university is the preferred destination, and those university graduates then lead to having white-collar jobs. And we're thinking now about those social drivers and economic drivers, and realizing that there's another collar. We talk about blue collar and we talk about white collar, but we're talking about gold collar jobs, those jobs that students graduate into that our workplace jobs, destinations, our university destinations, our college destinations, our community living destinations, and apprenticeships. So when we talk about recalculating the route, we talk about considering multiple destinations and pathways to success. The other thing we're talking about in a recalculated route is honoring students' DNA. And as I've been thinking about DNA, I think we also need to honor teachers' DNA and leaders' DNA. However, in the book we do focus on student DNA. And that to me and to Gail is defined as the skill development strand of our education system. That is, knowing the student, offering those career paths, developing students' interpersonal skills, self-regulatory skills. The second DNA strand is the curriculum, the knowledge strand. So looking at collaborative inquiries from kindergarten through to year 12 and beyond, to honoring the curriculum experiential learning opportunities outside of the classroom. They're often more exciting than inside the classroom opportunities, unfortunately. It doesn't have to be the way. The third DNA strand, or strand of our DNA analogy, is the knowledge application strand. And we feel that if we know our students and we've provided that robust, relevant curriculum, then students need also opportunities to apply their knowledge in ways such as co-op programs, experiential learning programs, in terms of our specialist high skill majors. So all of those hands-on, authentic learning opportunities where students can show that they can apply the skills from the curriculum strand.
Can you talk a little bit about finding true north?
Yes, yes, absolutely. So to us, when we have those strands in place, and we've considered the skills of the literate graduate, including our 21st century learning skills, the communication skills, the innovation mindset, the curiosity, creativity, then students have an opportunity to find their true north, not just north, but actually their true north that speaks to them in terms of their skills, their interests, and their dispositions. So because really many students seem to be burdened with any directional do, and we don't think that's applicable or appropriate. We want students to find their true north, their true being that matches their DNA.
Right, and it starts here and moves all the way up.
Absolutely, and we just can't emphasize that enough, that it does start in kindergarten. Having been a kindergarten teacher and a teacher of students in year 10 and beyond, and now big students who are just a little bit older at university, I truly believe that those early years are absolutely foundational in predicting high school graduates. So it has to start early, and it has to be often, and it has to be a structured approach, paying a special attention to the transitions throughout schooling.
Important.
Yeah.
What would you say are the key dimensions that enable innovation in the classroom?
Well, we certainly know that that teachers make the difference. We know they're the first line and such an important part of our students' learning. And I would say the second area for us to consider is the third teacher. And the third teacher is the learning environment. And we often don't think about the learning environments that we create for our students. And they don't have to be fancy. They have to be thoughtful and thought-provoking for our students. They have to be relevant, exciting and inspiring places to learn. So when I now do learning walks and talks training. And when I take groups into classrooms, small groups into classrooms, the first thing I think about is that third teacher. Mm-hmm. So what's on the walls that really measures student engagement? And what are the students doing? Are they leaning in? Are they speaking with each other? Are they in small groups? Are they investigating? And so for me, in thinking about our classrooms, I think they need to move from that growth-promoting climate to a culture of deep learning. They need to move from engagement of our students, leaning in and eye to eye, to actually empowering our students, empowering them to be clearly articulate about their own learning and their own improvement. We need to think about that deep learning and moving from being collectives to being collaborative in our classrooms.
I've got a quote from your book that I think fits. Those leaders who are more innovative may try to think creatively about the breadth and depth of experiences and opportunities they provide at their schools so as to ensure that all students can see themselves in the learning. In the book you provide some excellent examples. How can school leaders ensure that all students see themselves in the learning?
Well, we've developed several different ways to ensure that leaders not only know their teachers, but also know their students, know the needs, the resources required, and also have that first-hand knowledge of what's going on in the building. So the first thing we talk about is doing learning walks and talks. Getting out into classrooms daily, walking with a critical friend as a partner, looking at the school through different perspectives, different lenses, and then asking students 5 questions. Mm-hmm. And these 5 questions, to me, really are data. It's about data collection, leaders knowing how students are doing. So the questions are, what are you learning? How are you doing? How do you know? How can you improve? And where do you go for help? And in thinking about those 5 questions, they're great for students, but I think they're really applicable to us too. Yes. They're good for teachers, and they're good for leaders to consider. So that's certainly one way. Another way is to celebrate small wins. And we do a lot of collective professional development, and hopefully the leaders will have teachers leading alongside them, moving from modeled to shared to guided to creating interdependent practitioners. But there needs to be at a point in the year where we celebrate the learning and we mobilize the learning across staff members, across schools in a district. So those are just a couple of our examples that are concrete things that that leaders can do to ensure that all students are learning and that all teachers are learning and learning from each other and alongside our students.
And you talk about leaders having those learning conversations,
yes,
so that the school's talking about the district or the school board's talking about learning and how data move the learning along.
Exactly.
Can you talk a little bit about that,
Yeah.
that conversation?
So the training is learning walks and talks. So the walks are walking in classrooms, but the talks are talking with teachers about the authentic questions leaders want to know more about. So we're not talking about walks to be judgmental or evaluative or do teacher performance appraisals. We're talking about growth-promoting walks that encourage, after walking daily in buildings, encourage conversations with teachers, those open to learning conversations that Vivienne Robinson talks about. Also, in walking and talking in our schools, leaders get the sense of where the expected practices are taking place and then how they can match up teachers to learn from each other. So when we walk in buildings. We're not visiting classrooms anymore. We're not, as superintendents, we're not visiting schools to have tea and you know, read the improvement plan. We're out in classrooms walking, and we're talking with students, and then we're talking with teachers and leaders after to really ask those questions that will cause reflection.
That's so important in the book that you talk about that everyone is a leader.
Yes.
At all levels, and
Yes.
everyone models
Yes.
the behavior and the
Absolutely.
expectations and the expected practice in the
Exactly.
school.
And
And
once the leaders are modeling, we also hope they're thinking about how they share the leadership, and then move that leadership to have others guiding the practice so that everyone becomes an interdependent practitioner.
And then you lead to sustainability.
Absolutely.
It all works.
It does. It does.
After all the surveys and feedback you've looked at in writing this book, how do you think we can create an educational system that prepares students to become innovative thinkers and capable problem solvers?
I think what Gail and I learned from our interviews and surveys was that there are pockets of excellent innovative practices, and in the book we certainly give lots of examples. But we looked hard to find practices that were pervasive across the system, or across the province or state. So I think that's our work. That consistency of innovation and entrepreneurial practice across all schools. Access, open access for students to have voice and choice across all schools, not just in pockets, and we know there's excellent practice. We talk about the excellent practice, but we want it to be pervasive. And we look to Germany, and there are practices that are pervasive there. We wrote about Switzerland and the practice there of the partnerships among education and the military and the policymakers that provided incredible out-of-classroom experience for students everywhere. And of course we look to Ontario as well. And we see in Ontario that the co-op programs are firmly embedded in all of our secondary schools. We see that the specialist high skill majors are now looked upon as opening up opportunities across our schools. 700 or more of our schools are hubs for all students to attend. So we've gone from a small number to many. That's what we were looking for. We were looking for those programs that were replicable, that could be provided for all students and embedded as articulation programs with colleges and universities, where students had opportunities to log hours for apprenticeships in secondary schools, so that they got a head start, a feeling of confidence. So there are many of those programs in isolated pockets that we would like to see everywhere and embedded in practice and policy.
The thread that I saw in the book, and as you're speaking, you talk about authentic, feedback-driven, real-life application.
Yes, absolutely.
You go back to that often.
Yes, I do. And you know, I often talk that I have 3 words in my mantra, and Gail and I wrote about this in the book as well, and that's focus, align, and give and get feedback. So focus, align, and feedback. And for me, feedback, as John Hattie says, is that powerful driver for students, for teachers, and for leaders.
You've said so many wonderful things tonight. If there were 3 takeaways you wanted to leave the audience with, our participants, what would they be?
Okay. That we need to listen and hear our students' voices and give them choices. That we need to consider multiple formats in terms of data and that in using data, it's always student-focused, and that we need to ensure we have the highest quality teaching in all of our classrooms, that we're about assessment for and as learning that differentiates our instruction. And we have to ensure that our most struggling students have our best teachers teaching them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This has been wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks, Cam. Thank you, everyone.
So thank you. Thank you, Lyn. We appreciate your commitment to system change thinking that enables improvement around the globe. To learn more about Lyn's book, see the link at the bottom of your screen. To view this and other ISL videos, visit our website under the Resources tab. We encourage you to continue the conversation on this and other topics through our social media accounts. Thanks, and have a great evening.
Thanks a lot, Cam. Thanks, everyone.